Hi, my name is Gia Hamilton, and thank you for joining me for Live Your Purpose Artfully, a video series that looks at creatives and innovators who are living, working, and visiting the city of New Orleans.
So I feel like you and I, we have not seen each other in a really long time. It's been kind of on the periphery. But we had some really, I think, beautiful moments of sharing space together.
Definitely.
In ways that, for me, it's like the people that you connect with that you feel like are a part of your tribe are kind of like always a part of your tribe, regardless of like where they are in time and space. And so we saw each other the other night out dancing Afrobeat, which was super apropos for me that we would be out dancing and see each other. So
especially in that wonderful space with all those, I knew there was going to be a lot of magical people that I hadn't seen in a while that I wanted, because even when I first heard about the party, I don't go out to parties too much, but this was one of those where it's like, let me just buy this $5 ticket, because I know $5 ain't, I got that little bit, and I can go and see, see and dance and be in that vibe.
Yeah.
But what were you
No, so I agree with you. These are the kind of spaces where you get to see everybody, and so it's kind of like people I love everywhere, and then the movement. For me, like, dance is just so important, and having like an opportunity to like socially be in that space.
It's one of those really liberating, spiritually expressive moments, or not moments, but movement, and just, it's like a tool. It's like singing. I think that, I know that I'm at my happiest when I'm making up songs all the time, just like singing around, and I'm like, okay, like I'm feeling open and free to just like, sing and dance and create and be. And just have that weaved into your being, and not like, okay, I have to have these things in these spaces. And also the idea of like people not being comfortable with their voice. Like we're told, like as children, it's kind of like explore, you tell a child to draw like that where they say you tell a child to draw a tree or something and they just draw it. Adult might be like, well, I can't draw, and then you have to prod them. So it's kind of like that with our voice too. And singing and dancing, but they should just be totally all the time, everywhere, as much as we can, to just shake it out a little bit. Just, like express that we're beings and have feelings and need to move.
Yes.
We need to have things flow through us.
It's interesting that you say that, because we met through Gris Gris Lab, an old project of mine, and I felt like that space was this kind of magnet for this kind of like flow and chi. Like I feel like I came in contact with people in my tribe because of this space. Do you remember when we first met? I was just thinking about this. Do you remember what event it was for, or what things that we were doing?
It's really blurry. I remember kind of like hearing about you, like, because I met you pretty shortly after I moved here, and I think it was the spring that I took the food justice class. But the first time we actually met, it's kind of like you've kind of been there, and I know I took that class with you, and that's how we kind of like really gelled and really like solidified a friendship and and a tribeness. But I don't remember. Do you remember?
I was trying to think of it as well, and I felt like it definitely felt like it centered around food. So I was like, I feel like we grew some food together. And then I thought about the foraging festival.
Yes.
And Heidi and these paths into the city to find food, and then Heidi being one of the chefs for this cook-off.
And like we were amazed. Everybody was like amazed. We did all this, work and stuff, and we were amazed at how well it kind of turned out, and like that there were people there that showed up to like that we could just take around the city to forage for food. In the urban jungle.
In the urban jungle.
Yeah.
So let's back up a little bit. So what brought you to New Orleans? Like, what was your entry back to the city?
Well, So I was living in Hawaii in 2008-9, and I left. It was time for me to leave Hawaii. You know, it's far, it's expensive. You know, there aren't that many black people there. I was kind of ready to be around more black people again, and so I traveled for about a year between the states, and I did a few months in South America. I went and visited a friend in Tobago, and then I took a ferry from Trinidad to Venezuela, and then I traveled by bus all the way down to Buenos Aires.
Wow.
So at the end of that trip, I was like, okay, I need to start thinking about where I'm gonna live. And I had visited New Orleans at the beginning of that year.
Yeah.
And so in the fall, my stepmother was like, well, we hadn't talked in a long time, and I had called her up, and she was saying, well, I'm going on a road trip to New Orleans, like to look for an apartment. Do you want to come? So I was like, oh, yeah, cool. I'm not doing anything. I'd love to go back to New Orleans. And when I was here, I was like, I could just stay. Like, this could be the city that I, moved to. But I told a friend that I would go to New Mexico and give that a try. So I spent about a month or two there. And it didn't kind of feel right. And so I was like asking myself, it was one of those like, okay, you got to make a choice moment. So I just started thinking about, New Orleans. And I just started smiling. And I said, well, I guess that's the answer. So then I
love that. The smile became the ultimate pro.
Yeah.
It's like, this makes me happy.
Yeah, it feels right, and certainly it was the decision to make. This is the place that has felt like home, like no other place I've ever been to. And for it to be such a so strong and chauvinistic in its values of like home and we, you know what I mean? Like not necessarily bad way, but in a protective way, and certainly like there's reasons for that, of course. But even through all that, I felt so embraced by this place.
Yes.
In fact, Mama Jennifer was like, well, you from here? And I was like, I'm not from. She was like, yeah, but, and it's like really certain, and for certain even New Orleanians to be like, well, this is always home. Like for people to say that kind of stuff to me as I was kind of transitioning into having a different relationship where I wouldn't necessarily be here full time. Like it really meant a lot to me, especially in a place like this. So that really showed me the life that I had kind of built and embraced and was open to like having come to fruition.
I think of you as this creative, this free spirit who's just done so many different things and just engaged life and people in so many different ways. What were some of the things that you were really interested in doing when you were here? What were you pursuing or passionate about?
Well, I got to you because I really wanted to do food justice work. I wanted to do farming work. I was that was where in my mind I was going. I wanted to basically be back to the land. And when I was in Hawaii, I had kind of like my spiritual evolution. I had kind of an epiphany, and I was really, really embracing my spiritual side in a way in which I hadn't prior to that. Not that I had like ignored it; it was always kind of there. But I had significant, impactful moments that really like showed me how present kind of spirit can be in your life, and how that relationship can really flourish. But then when I got here, I got kind of sucked into in a way, because that was my food justice moment when I was here, and I even like volunteered at farms a little bit, so doing the food justice class with you, and then I got kind of pulled into doing prison industrial complex work. So I was working with critical resistance, and I did, and that was volunteer. My stepmother, she was working there at the time, and so then I just started doing that to the point where I got a job at Vogue, Voice of the Ex-Offender, focusing on formerly incarcerated people's rights in their communities, and how to help them kind of navigate and throw off some of the shackles that still exist once they step outside of the cage doors. So then I spent about 3 to 5 years in that, in that world. And it was really, I really give myself. I don't have any other agenda. I'm not motivated by money, and I really do want to like connect with folks. And if there's like work ahead of me, I really want to do the work. So I see this work, I was very serious and passionate about it. And it really like burnt me out. Yeah. Really seriously.
Did you feel like you were doing organizing work and fusing organizing and healing work together? Like, how did you categorize it? How did you talk about that work to other people?
Well, very much it was like, so I felt like I was spirit heavy when I got here and trying to get, to the land a bit. And then I became very political heavy, and it totally kind of flipped to the point where then I had to integrate and I had to balance. Yeah. So it's like the political knowledge is very useful, being able to navigate and express and communicate all of these complex ideas around, how we're relating to each other in this world and to the land, and like there's all these implications in both, so it was very important for me to kind of do that. But I kind of I had a spiritual community who was also politically active too, just to some degree, but not necessarily in the same ways. So I definitely got to I continued doing Reiki work, but sometimes it would be very compartmentalized. Yeah. And I didn't necessarily like that, but then towards the end of kind of my tenure doing that work, I did start trying to incorporate it more and incorporate spirit kind of work more into that work as well. Yeah. And now I'm very much doing kind of the spirit work. Yeah. And I'm called to do that. But so it's hard to find the balance in that. And that was one of the problems that I found in, the movement. And I do that because there's so much going on to just call it like there's so much happening. It's just like to call a community with widespread interests a community when not everybody's moving towards the same place or going, but because we have the same skin color or something, we're just lumped as if like that necessarily makes sense, which it doesn't always.
Absolutely.
So there's this kind of like secularism that I think it's false, but it's unfortunate we're in a place where people can deny that spirit exists. Yeah. And then that's okay. If it's not proven by science, which science does not equal truth. Science is another tool that we use to navigate this world. Science has totally been perverted and corrupted by politics and by the different biases that we have, by misogyny. I mean, just look at the lack of, how women's bodies were studied and integrated into scientific knowledge for a long period of time. So anyway, so I'm saying that to say so it was, I think even now that's one of the things that makes me, that keeps me from really embracing being back into kind of like that political movement and activist life is I need the balance, and I also don't want to be because I work a lot of times in universal tones and in infinite thought, have thoughts about how what does the infinite picture look like, what is the much larger, not just back in like the earth large, but like
this very macro. It's funny, I don't know if you know this, but what brought me down to New Orleans was that I was the national training director for Acorn. And so I was training organizers like all over the country. And I have to agree with you. There was something very useful about that work that I have since used in other areas of my life. I mean, even just like starting Gris Gris Lab and thinking about how to engage community as a new person in a new neighborhood, on a new street, etc. But I found that it was in many ways like all-consuming, and that it was in many ways also about the kind of selfless martyrdom that I needed to actually figure out how to balance in my own personal life, right? It was like, I actually don't want to be a martyr. I actually think that giving to myself only allows me to give to others in a more expansive way. And so it's so interesting now when I think about listening to your journey and the kind of, I don't know, like the points of connections that are there. You then started like just doing a lot of healing work. Is that right? And a lot of energy work.
Well, now basically that is, I'm kind of like, I'm building my practice.
Yeah.
Where I had to separate, so especially if I was going to come back to the city, because people knew me for doing kind of that political kind of work. And you're right, like, I would go, one time I use this as an example, one time I went to the store and I just wanted to, it was like 8 o'clock at night, I just wanted to go grab like some wine and something else and go home and just relax. And someone starts talking to me about like solidarity and like all this stuff, and I was just like, and of course I didn't say it, but in my mind I was like, I really just wanted to, I just didn't want to. But that's how people would always look at me, like I'd be introduced and be like, yes, does prison activist stuff, and I would have to. One time it would come off rude sometimes, but I had to start putting up walls and boundaries and be like, I'm a person, I am not an issue. Right. So like, yes. I get that that's like something that, but I don't really want to just always be talking about that. Whereas with spirit work now, I notice now, like, I don't care. I want to always talk about spirit work.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. I am a spirit,
Absolutely.
But I'm certainly not an issue. And so
Absolutely.
like it feels like I can embrace it all in that. So when I left, so I had to create space.
Yeah.
Between, kind of like I had to leave an old life and really like step into a new one. And I wasn't even sure that I could do that in this place because I really lost my anonymity and was really out there in the ways in which I was. So
I definitely could understand that.
So
yes.
It was, so in 2015, I left my job and I, had saved up money, so I wasn't like knowing what the next thing was. I just knew that I was really exhausted and just really needed a shift. So I ended up getting into a relationship with a good friend of mine, and she at the time was kind of free of her responsibilities at the moment too. So I was like, well, I was going to go to California and hang out with my sister, but I actually really wanted to leave the country, and I wasn't sure how I was going to, but if you're willing, let's go to Ecuador and sit on a beach. And so that was one of the best decisions probably also. So I did that. We sat on a beach in Ecuador for 10 months.
That sounds so inspiring.
I mean, the relationship didn't last, and she ended up staying there for about 2 years actually. And really doing amazing work down there. But it just so happened, so I was only led to this beach because a friend of mine who I knew from college in Hawaii suggested it. He's a surfer, so he went there for the surfing. But I just went there for the beach. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I'll go to your suggestion. And it's funny because I've never been to another beach like this, and I don't even like to say the name too much because I don't want it to become overrun because it's really small.
We'll let it stay your secret for this.
Every now and then, only certain people do I like tell the name of the place. So it's about 2 mile stretch of beach, and it was littered with all types of rocks and crystals, and so of like, not similar. I'll show you one in my wallet. But just to show people like the different kinds that were out there. And so of course I'm like a total rockhead. I just started collecting all of these rocks, and then one day I got this message kind of like to set them up like as chakra stones. And so I kind of sat on my bed one day, and I had my piles by the color. I had my spectrum piles, and I just sat there and I kind of felt like being attuned, being initiated in that moment, and it felt like I was, at another home at my office. You know what I mean? And it was just like almost like playing an instrument at that moment, and then I gave, my partner at the time, I gave her treatment, and I really just, we ended up moving down the road to our own house, and I kind of sat in if you see pictures of it, it's basically a circle of kind of stones, bones, shells, feathers, and that was kind of like a cocoon. And when I emerged out of that months and months and months later, like I'm evolved in a sense. My skill set is like shifted to the point where I've been looking for people who have had who have had very much, I want something very similar to the experience that I'm having, because I've never kind of heard about someone experiencing it quite in the way that I am.
Yeah.
And it's very much like biomagnetics, like I always kind of feel energy moving around me and can feel like drawn to things, and it's kind of always at work. So I'm very much learning now how to embrace the idea of understanding myself as a frequency, and not just like, you know what I mean, not the limits of this, shell.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and really, in a tangible way, in a way that it's not just like theoretical, but.
Absolutely. It's funny, again, like that point of connection, I feel like I've had such an interesting relationship to the term healer. And I feel like I've always been a person where touch is so important to me. Like I recognize as an adult now, I do it so naturally. Like it's, I don't think about it. I'm just always drawn to like just human touch. And so energy work became that extension, when you couldn't or shouldn't necessarily give that like physical touch to someone, or when you could, through an extension of, a totem or something else, actually have a sharper connection, if that makes sense. And I remember very distinctly like having an experience with someone where it was the first time like I recognized like my empathic like qualities about myself, and it was that I was starting to pick up on things where people were laying on my table, and I might have been doing body work, but I was also taking in things, and I was starting to experience them in my body. So it was like this very interesting relationship between like the empath taking something on, feeling it, and having to then also connect with all this greater energy and then share, right? Or act as the conduit. And so in terms of your own practice, do you feel like that practice is it rooted in Reiki? Is it rooted in something that you feel like you could talk about, or is it more or less just experienced?
Well, I teach Reiki now.
Yeah.
But I kind of, that has its own like dogma attached to it, and I'm much less attached to myths and stories in that sense. So like when I teach it, it's like I feel like I have obligations of specific things that I have to share, and I add things on that weren't in my class. Like I teach people, different kind of energy exercises so that they can really get more sensitive to the subtle bodies, which wasn't necessarily, it was in my Reiki too, but I put it in Reiki 1.
Yeah.
So it's like I try to tell people like what I do is like Reiki plus, because I cannot separate Reiki from my being at this point. So it's not like I'm trying to like shun that, and that was a very great entryway into giving me tools to be able to even think about how to practice and stuff in a real way. So I'm forever grateful for that system, and there's limits to things that are kind of like packaged and structured, and that and I also don't want to create like, I don't want to be like, I'm doing this kind of Reiki. I don't want to create another Reiki. I don't want to, the field is too kind of, there's too much out there. So I'm just trying to like usually now, like I don't even always call myself a hero. I say that I'm an energy worker. That's just the easy baseline umbrella term. And then if I was to go deeper into it, like now I think metaphysician is calling me. Yeah. As a way to describe what I do. But I just, there's always going to be Reiki in it. And it's so far beyond that it wouldn't be right to say that what I do is like Reiki. So if I was to do a straight like Reiki session with someone, I don't even know exactly what that would look like anymore, because I'm like, okay, now would I, like if someone was like, I just want, because my sessions are about $100 for an hour and a half, but then for 3 hours it'll just be like $150. Yeah. Because I really like long sessions, because if you, like with my work, it feels like layers come off. So sometimes it might be 45 minutes of just working with one layer, and then I get to something deeper. Or then if I'm working with people now, their space, not necessarily, I shouldn't say their space. That's why I like to work on people in their space, because the space around will call to me.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's like, so now even I do my work, I don't have to do work with people. I can do work on space, I can do work with trees, I can do work with animals, I can work with, it was harder to connect with, but celestial beings, and then there's even, it's getting more expansive now. I've collaboratively created with Spirit a oracle system.
Wow.
So, and it works telepathically. I was going somewhere with this, because you had asked a question, but there was somewhere I think I was trying to get back. Oh, okay, just talking about So I incorporate a lot of different things. And so it's like, and it's through feeling. So this oracle teaches me how to use it.
Yeah.
So it's like the initial spark, an idea, whatever came through me, and it's a card system, with many different words and relationships and places and actions. And I think about it as like a spirit communication tool. So it's like a mainframe in a sense, and it's like my spiritual energy certainly runs it, and then other spirit energies connect to it. So the really only limitation is consciousness, and your imagination to even think about those beings that you might want to reach out to. Like the moon has come through and given me messages, the earth has come through, my father comes through, my grandmother comes through, and so like I'm able to have like, real kind of like across the veil communication. And it works telepathically, which I love, so that if I bring someone else in, and it really is, it's not a tool for people who are any kind of skeptical or who are, who just aren't ready to kind of sit and be willing to accept that, like, you can have a direct conversation with spirit, and certainly I'm here and doing my part in it, but I don't even need to hear your question. And I prefer not to, because I don't want to think about I don't want to have my own mind enter into.
Yeah, that analytical space that this kind of concrete world that we're in, rewards, right? So much. Yeah, I'll have to get your thoughts on the feeling of this space.
Oh yeah, I mean, I when I walk into spaces, I feel around them. In New Orleans, there's so much spirit energy floating around that it's always interesting when a place feels like really. And now, because there's always movement, no place ever feels like totally like before, when I was just kind of, then I'd be like, when I'd feel into my, I'm like, okay, you feel nice and bad. Now there's always movement. Like, so the movement doesn't indicate anything to me now, whereas it indicated something to me more before. But yeah, no, I don't feel any any uncomfortable, anything uncomfortable or something, which sometimes is like indicating that there is some energy that might need to be shifted or transmuted or transformed.
Yeah.
I think you're getting a signal.
I think it's interesting too, because I think about my transition out of Gris Gris Lab space and that work, and like you, I really feel like some of what I'm been engaged in is like thinking about like institutional healing and like, the healing of these entities that are in many ways like ephemeral in nature, right? They're made up of people. The people can change, but there's certain values and certain culture. And like, what does it look like to shift culture, to really support the people, to build like these greater infrastructures? And it's funny because I don't know that my colleagues know that I'm doing that work. It's a bit more subverted. I know that you also are engaged in not just doing, like you said, this work with individuals, but also with places. And so how does this show up? I mentioned that I do a lot of this work in a subverted way, but what does it look like when you show up intentionally, kind of claiming space to do this work?
Okay.
And how have you navigated that?
So I'll tell you, this was when I was first really kind of embracing. So when I got back, there was a point where I realized like that I was like in uncharted territory, at least for my own personal sense and being. And I realized, I said, oh, you know what? Like, I could seem really like, people don't always believe. People think, you know, their belief has some resonance or relevance to truth, but which it doesn't. And so I realized, like, oh, there is a point where I might be talking to people and they might think that I'm like either crazy or lying about what I'm experiencing. Like there's something else. Like, oh, well, I'm sure it's not, you know, spirits or whatever, or, you know, energy just making you feel these things, and or I need more proof, which is funny that the oracle that it does not deal with that at all. It will shut itself down when it comes up with those kind of things. So I was walking into a Chinese restaurant somewhere on St. Bernard, and I just felt, and this was when I was like newly kind of like walking into spaces and just like feeling stuff to this degree, to the point where I was like, okay, I can actually do something to shift this. And so I walked in there and I felt something really foul. Like it was like, it can be painful. And so I was like, well, I need to just start doing some work over it. And it's like, I'll be on floors and in corner, like you'll see me crawling around, popping up. It really looks very like, because it's like fast, you know, it just sometimes just takes me, I don't know where it's necessarily going to go.
Yeah.
It's become more predictive in the sense where I'm like, before I touch an object, I can kind of start feeling the flow of it. So I might be like, okay, and then it's going to take me that way. But then, you know, so very much now, and now I'm more embracing. I was kind of afraid of being in a city like New Orleans again, especially like when I would go to the French Quarter and be in that like that was intense, you know, made me feel nauseous sometimes. And now I'm like, no, you're just actually, like, don't worry about it. You're actually just powerful enough to even deal with those kind of spaces. Like, it's like, okay, you know, if you know, walk in fear and are afraid of what's going to happen there. Yeah. Like, it's like, there was something to knowing that you're sensitive, and, you know, you're still evolving. It's still a process. You're powerful enough to walk into those spaces and be fine. You can be amongst the densest, evilest energy, because now I'm actually like embracing evil in this way. And I embrace the love and light because that's what I walk in. But the evil as not necessary, but as worthy, as like valuable, as like something that it's just another, you know, we need the shadow and the light. And one of the reasons why one of my work here on Earth is like balance, you know. And so I have to, especially on this side, and that's the thing too, where it's like, where I like to be able to be in the spirit side of things, because you can have like a non-opinion about it all and just let it be. Whereas if you're in this really political space, you have to have very hard opinions and very hard judgments about enemies and, you know, who's, you know, all these things that are moving, and it's like there isn't always the space. Like there's a lip service to like healing and self-healing and all this kind of stuff, but it's not really embedded in the work. And there's also those people who are holding a lot of space that help is actually the hustle for them. And I don't want to, like, it's whatever, but it's true. I've seen it. Help is the hustle. They're not doing, you know, they can actually be blocking the work a little bit. But anyway, so when I walk into a space, now I just go. Like, it depends on if I'm like hired to do it, or if I am just like, now I'm always working.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I just walk into a space and just kind of just start feeling around, and it's depends on the space of what it looks like. I can feel it through my entire body. So I can, if I let my body go, then it's intense, because I feel all this spinning. So my physical body will spin, and then it'll want me to walk around. Yeah. So I've learned ways to negotiate that, whereas I don't usually let that happen. I usually hold something or use my hands or use my body in a way where I have more control than just letting myself go in that sense, because spirit isn't always gentle. Yeah. You know, I've certainly been thrown into walls, which it looks like I'm throwing myself into a wall, so that's why, of course, I look crazy or drunk or something out there. but I'll be drawn to trees. Like, I'd love to, we should go to, the park and you can watch this. Like, I can, in a field of trees, it feels like very much I'm helping them to also spread messages and energy to each other, just kind of like how underground root connections work, where they're sharing resources that way. I feel like I very much take energy of a place, of a thing sometimes, and bring it to another spot. And luckily that doesn't feel too heavy or too, done with.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm very good at being able to clear the energy that isn't serving me.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's such important work as we, as humans, right, are making lots of transitions, like global transitions. And just thinking about like resources, right, in the most expansive way. If you had access to just, the kind of concrete power of calling in and pulling down resources, what would you be doing? What would be important to you? What kinds of things do you think you might be working on? Where might your imagination go?
Well, I would definitely want to have some kind of space that I could invite people to. I would love it if it was, around land, because, then we could use that land to work directly with the earth and, and just build up the energy of that space, or just, be in relationship, in symbiosis with it. So there's that. And how I would invite people in would look very differently. So I would definitely want to do kind of retreats type stuff. And instead of like Reiki, one of the things that I do want to do also is just kind of like an energy 101, like an energy healing or energy working 101, where there's not very much dogma around it or anything. It's just like, okay, let me just give some practical things out there. I would want there to be kind of sanctuary. I would definitely want people who, like me right now, I'm kind of like, I'm not lost, but I'm wandering, and I have been. And I don't have a lot of resources at the moment, but I'm not necessarily afraid. I mean, Spirit's told me that I will be taken care of, so I just have to trust in that.
Yeah.
And then I was actually told by Spirit to not go back to work, and so I was like, okay, I have the work that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so there would be that. So I definitely would want space, and then I would want to be able to go to different places and certainly talk to different folks about what's happening. But I would also want to like build a really solid kind of magic spiritual community where we're doing work together. Like I would love to. I think that there is so much information out there. I'm not necessarily looking to just put out more information because it's really there. But I would love to use the oracle with folks so that we can, because I'm limited on how much I can do myself too, and it really I think is a tool that requires and like really invites other people's energy to come into it. And I'm just I'm very curious as to who, what other people would want to connect with, and what could come out of that. So just even I want to put out that kind of like that beacon, that lighthouse to call other people in to really, and on my website I even kind of have that, like one of the reasons I'm even putting myself online and telling parts of my story like that is to attract people that would do the work with me, because I didn't have a lot of human teachers. I had some Reiki teachers and some folks that a spiritual community that I did work with, but a lot of things it very much was reading and studying that way and doing exercises and then sitting and meditating and then going to Ecuador, really just figuring it out. And now I definitely am glad, because my spirit guides are so strong and very much guide me as to what's some good ways to move and shift and places to be. So I would also want there to be a community and when I say community, I'm talking about let's look at New Orleans, Black folks who don't necessarily have access to this work in different ways. I want to find some way to pull them in if they were, you know what I mean, if they were interested, because there are a lot of people that are. So find a way to do that without it being, you know, so esoteric or so just like inaccessible.
Yeah.
And spread that. I also do mediations too. So even incorporating that and like helping grow a culture where we all kind of have a lot more skills to, you know, pull energy in, share some healing energy with each other, and also conflict resolution.
Yeah.
And not just have and have all these different tools that we should actually, I think, be taught and incorporated.
Absolutely.
Like from birth and from the beginning. And it's unfortunate that like we get programmed with so many things that aren't really that useful to us, that are useful to either just keeping us, you know, in our specific positions. So what else? I mean, I could dream so big. I mean, I'm like...
No, I love it.
You know, I would just, yeah. I would love to have, you know, lots of resources to be able to, to make lots of things. I want to be able to make a lot of different kind of magic tools, have like a, you know, the, just, yeah. There would be that. Certainly, I love making kind of wands and woodworking. I definitely want to grow more of my harder skills.
Yeah.
In that sense. So I would definitely take more classes myself to learn how to just... I want to know how to build houses and stuff too. I think that kind of stuff is important.
Yeah.
What else would... Maybe, you know, what would be good too is... I mean, and this would be... And I never thought about this before, but to even just go around and be able to reclaim some of the magic that's been kind of stolen and removed from different communities and is like hidden in museums. Museums are like, I love going to museums because of how much energy is in.
It's so true.
And like in the Museum of Art over here, the most powerful, strong energy rooms are the ones where there's the Pacific Islander room, kind of. And there's that huge... That thing is beaming a lot of stuff. That room's pretty
it's like
strong.
These repositories
yes.
of like, yeah.
And the Indian, the place for the Indian.
Yeah.
And because those are also the oldest, I think. The African is less so because I think that there's like, it's newer. A lot of that stuff is newer and there's something there, but it's not as... And they also don't have like these huge kind of... They don't have the same kind of statues that they have in those other two rooms, which really hold a lot of energy. But those a lot of those masks do have a lot going on with those as well. Anyway, I don't even know how I got to reclaiming the artifacts and yeah.
So my last question is, and it's kind of a silly one, but it's one that I answer. So I. With the boys, we created like superhero names for ourselves, and so a lot of our early family life was around us being this like superhero family called the Power Rock family, and we all had a crystal or a stone that they would each get to hold, and we would talk about like what our powers were, right? Some, you know, projections and some things that I've actually seen happen. So if you are and would claim publicly your superhero status, what might your name be, and what do you think you would want the public to know as your superhero power?
Oh, I'm keeping my name. It's Gahiji. That is enough. So I'm fine with just being Gahiji. There's enough there. Enough power and concentration in that name. But what was the next word? What would my powers?
What would your main powers that you were like, you're known for this thing? We would always talk about like the combination of superheroes that were like, this person's this and this person's this too.
There's something about kind of connecting. And not necessarily making connections between others, but connecting you know, myself with other people and just kind of, you know, being there with them and seeing them and, you know, creating that collective aura that happens when you kind of are in other people's space and energy and there's something to that and
the harnesser of the collective.
Right. Just being able to pull people close, and I certainly, and it happens in different ways. Meeting with people, but I just, as you were saying that, I just kind of was seeing like roots and webs and like you know how they kind of
absolutely
there's something in that.
I love a good mycelium mushroom story, right? I feel like mushrooms are pretty fantastic. Well, thank you.
Well, yes, thank you
sharing.
for inviting me into your space. And
absolutely.
yeah. Thank you.